Welcome back to LPBW Update, your number one source for the latest news and deepest insights into the world of Little People, Big World. Tonight, we are breaking a story that is so shocking, so deeply unsettling. It threatens to shatter the very foundation of the Roloff family legacy. We've all watched the drama unfold on Roloff Farms, but what we're about to discuss goes beyond petty arguments or business disputes. An insider report has reached us, a report detailing a devastating fire, a calculated deception, and a betrayal so profound it may be unforgivable. The iconic kids' castle, a symbol of a generation's childhood, is gone, reduced to smoldering ash. The official story is about a tragic accident, but our sources are painting a much, much darker picture, one that points directly to an act of arson. The central question we must ask is this: did Caryn Chandler burn down the castle to deliberately erase Amy Roloff's memory from the farm forever? Before we dive into the exclusive, heart-stopping details of this unfolding tragedy and the evidence that has been uncovered, I need you to do three things for us. First, hit that like button to show your support. Second, subscribe to LPBW Update and turn on all notifications so you don't miss a single update on this explosive story. And third, prepare yourself, because the information we're about to share will change the way you see the future of Roloff Farms. To truly understand the magnitude of this alleged act, we must first revisit the immense significance of the castle. This wasn't just a playset. For over 2 decades, that structure was more than wood, paint, and shingles. It was a tangible piece of the Roloff family's soul. It was the centerpiece of Matt and Amy's shared dream, a testament to a time when they were a united front, building a magical world for their 4 children. We've seen it in countless episodes, the backdrop to so many cherished memories. It was there for birthdays, for pumpkin seasons, for the simple, unscripted moments of family life that made us all fall in love with the Roloffs in the first place. It was the fortress Zach and Jeremy defended in their imaginary childhood wars. It was the fairy tale tower where Molly played princess. It was a quiet refuge for a thoughtful Jacob. For Matt, it was a monument to his creativity and his love for his children, a physical manifestation of the promise he made to give them a childhood unlike any other. For Amy, it was the heart of the home. The view from her kitchen window, a constant reminder of the family she had raised and the life she had built. The castle, along with the pirate ship and the other whimsical structures, represented the golden era of the Roloff family. They were, in essence, monuments to Amy's role as the matriarch and co-creator of that world. And that is precisely where our story begins to take a sinister turn. According to insider reports for Caryn Chandler, these structures were not symbols of joy. They were specters of the past. Living on the farm in the shadow of a 30-year marriage has been a constant battle for legitimacy in the eyes of both the family and the public. Every corner of that property is imbued with the history of Matt and Amy. Every story Matt tells, every landmark he points to, is tied to his ex-wife. Sources suggest that Caryn has long felt like a guest in her own home, constantly reminded that she is the second chapter, not the first. The castle, in particular, was the most potent and visible symbol of that history. It was a constant, towering reminder of Amy, of the family Matt had before her. It represented a legacy she had no part in creating, and therefore one she could never truly be a part of. This feeling of being a secondary figure, of living inside someone else's memories, is said to have festered. She watched as Matt's dream of the new grand house, their house, was built, but it was still surrounded by these powerful totems of his past life. She wanted a clean slate. She wanted to build a future with Matt that was exclusively theirs, a new legacy that would overwrite the old one. To do that, the most powerful symbols of the past had to be removed. This brings us to her vision for the farm, a vision she has made no secret of. Caryn has consistently pushed for a more commercial, profit-oriented future for the property. We've heard her talk about turning it into a high-end wedding venue, a luxury glamping destination, or a more streamlined, adult-focused tourist attraction. These ideas, while potentially profitable, all share one common thread. They require the removal of the very things that made the farm a family wonderland. The old, whimsical, childlike structures that screamed Matt and Amy's family had no place in a future of elegant wedding pavilions and upscale canvas tents. The castle stood in the way, not just physically, but symbolically. It was an anchor to the past, preventing the farm from sailing into the future she envisioned. Our sources allege that her frustration grew into a dangerous obsession. She saw the destruction of the castle not as a loss, but as a necessary step, a clearing of the land to make way for her vision for their new beginning, a beginning that required the symbolic erasure of Amy Roloff. The night of the fire was, by all accounts, quiet and unremarkable. A late, moonless night on the farm. Matt and Caryn were in the main house. Matt, exhausted from a long day of projects, had gone to bed early. Caryn, however, was awake. The story she would later tell authorities and a devastated Matt was that she was up late, unable to sleep, working on some financial plans for the upcoming pumpkin season on her laptop. It was then, in the dead of night, that she claimed to have seen a flicker of light from the window. She described a scene of pure panic, seeing flames beginning to lick up the side of the iconic castle. She says she screamed for Matt, fumbled for her phone, and called 911, her voice trembling with shock and horror. By the time the fire department arrived, the old dry timber of the castle was fully engulfed. There was nothing they could do. They fought the blaze to prevent it from spreading to the nearby barns, but the castle itself was a total loss. In the morning, all that remained of the cherished landmark was a pile of blackened, smoldering debris and the broken heart of a family. Caryn played the role of the devastated, supportive partner to perfection. She was the one who held a shell-shocked Matt as he stared at the ruins. She was the one who fielded calls from the distraught children, offering words of comfort. She was the one who explained the obvious cause to everyone who would listen. A tragic, unforeseen accident. Her explanation was plausible, almost too plausible. It was the old, faulty wiring, she insisted, her voice filled with feigned sorrow. You know how old that structure was, honey. You built it yourself decades ago. The wiring just couldn't hold up. It was a tinderbox waiting to happen. It was a story that, on the surface, made sense. Matt's early projects, for all their charm, were not always up to modern code. Over the years, with the damp Oregon weather, it was conceivable that something had short-circuited. It was a simple, clean explanation that required no further questions and cast no blame. It was a tragedy, plain and simple, or so she wanted everyone to believe. But it was in the immediate aftermath, as the smoke was still rising from the ashes, that the first cracks in her story began to appear. Her deception, according to our insider, was revealed not in what she did, but in what she said. While comforting a numb and grieving Matt, she reportedly whispered the words that would later become the genesis of his suspicion. Honey, I know your heart is broken, and mine is too. It's a terrible, terrible tragedy, she began, before her tone shifted. But maybe it's a blessing in disguise. Now we have a clean slate. We can build something new in its place, something that represents us. The speed with which she pivoted from grief to opportunity was jarring. Before Matt could even process the full scope of his loss, Caryn was already in planning mode. Sources say that within hours, she was talking about the perfect location for a new wedding pavilion or a luxury glamping site right where the castle used to stand. She spoke of it as a chance to modernize and move forward to create a new landmark for a new era of the farm. To a grieving Matt, her words were initially just noise, the chatter of someone trying to find a silver lining in a dark cloud. But as the shock wore off, the sentiment behind them began to feel wrong. It was too fast, too opportunistic, too cold. She wasn't mourning the loss of a family heirloom. She was seizing a real estate opportunity. This immediate push to replace, to build over the ashes of his children's history with one of her commercial projects, planted the first tiny seed of doubt in Matt's mind. He started to replay the events of the night. Caryn, the only one awake. Caryn, the one with the immediate, convenient explanation. Caryn, the one who saw not a tragedy, but a blessing. The story of faulty wiring started to feel less like a plausible explanation and more like a pre-written script. The reaction from the rest of the Roloff family was one of pure, unadulterated devastation. When Zach and Jeremy heard the news, they were reportedly heartbroken. They had grown up with that castle. It was the backdrop to their entire childhood. For them, its destruction was like losing a piece of their own history, a part of their identity. We're told Amy was utterly shattered. From her home, just a few miles away, she could no longer see the familiar turret peeking over the trees. That structure was one of the last remaining symbols of the family unit she and Matt had built together. Its loss was a physical blow, a violent final chapter to her life on the farm. The children's grief was deep and personal, and it stood in stark contrast to Caryn's pragmatic, forward-looking response. This disparity was not lost on Matt. He saw the genuine pain in his children's eyes and heard the calculated optimism in his fiance's voice, and the disconnect was unnerving. For Matt Roloff, the builder, the creator, the master of the farm, the explanation of faulty wiring was more than just a convenient story. It was an insult to his craftsmanship. While he might cut corners on occasion, he is meticulous when it comes to the safety of his structures, especially those built for his children. He began to think back to the construction. He remembered running the electrical lines himself. He remembered using heavy-gauge, outdoor-rated wire. He remembered installing dedicated circuit breakers in the nearby barn to protect it. The idea that his work would spontaneously combust in such a catastrophic way just didn't sit right. It felt improbable. His grief began to morph into a gnawing suspicion, a professional's doubt that something was fundamentally wrong with the story he was being told. He knew his own work, he knew the castle, and he knew that a simple short circuit was unlikely to create the inferno that had consumed the entire structure so quickly. An electrical fire might start small, smolder, and produce a lot of smoke before erupting. This fire, based on the wreckage, had been explosive and intensely hot from the very beginning. The grief was still there, but now it was joined by a new, cold feeling, the need for answers. He decided that he couldn't just accept the tragic accident narrative. He had to see for himself. He had to walk through the ashes, not just as a grieving father, but as the builder who knew every single nail and board. He needed to understand how this could have happened. And so, under the guise of salvaging any possible mementos, Matt Roloff began his own private, heartbreaking investigation into the death of a dream, unaware that what he was about to uncover would threaten to destroy his entire future. The truth was buried in the ashes, and he was determined to find it. Matt Roloff stood at the edge of the destruction, the morning sun doing little to warm the cold dread that had settled deep in his bones. The acrid smell of burnt wood, wet ash, and something else, something chemical and wrong, clung to the air. This was more than just the scene of an accident. It felt like a gravesite, a place where 30 years of memories had been violently put to death. Caryn's words about faulty wiring echoed in his mind, but they sounded hollow, a flimsy excuse against the backdrop of this utter devastation. He was a builder. He understood fire, he understood construction, and what he was seeing did not align with the story he was being told. The official investigation would be done by the insurance companies and the fire department, but Matt knew they wouldn't see what he saw. They wouldn't know the soul of the structure. They wouldn't understand the nuances of its construction. He had to know the truth for himself, for his children, for Amy, for the legacy that now lay in a heap of black and gray. He took a step forward, his boots sinking into the sodden, ashen ground. Caryn had tried to stop him. "Matt, honey, don't," she had pleaded, her voice laced with a strange urgency. "It's too upsetting. There's nothing left to see. Let the cleanup crew handle it." But her concern felt less like an act of compassion and more like an attempt at containment. He had gently pushed past her, his focus singular. He was no longer just the grieving patriarch. He was an investigator on his own sacred ground. He started at the perimeter, his eyes scanning the debris with a practiced, critical gaze. An electrical fire, especially one from a supposed short circuit in old wiring, would have a distinct signature. It would likely start in one specific location near an outlet or a junction box. It would burn upward from that point of origin, creating a classic V pattern on whatever vertical surfaces remain. The heat would be most intense at that single point, and the damage would radiate outward from there. But that wasn't what Matt saw. As he carefully sifted through the wreckage, his hands covered in soot, he saw something deeply disturbing. The charring was wrong. It was too uniform, too widespread. Instead of one clear point of origin, there seemed to be several. He found areas near the base of the walls, at floor level, where the wood was charred deeper and more severely than the wood directly above it. This was an inversion of a typical electrical fire. This pattern, what fire investigators call pooling, suggested that a liquid had been splashed or poured onto the floor and then ignited, causing the fire to burn with incredible intensity from the ground up all at once. The entire base of the castle had been an inferno, which explained why it had been consumed so quickly, so completely. A short circuit in a wall would have smoldered, it would have created smoke, it might have taken an hour to truly engulf the structure. This fire had been different. It had been explosive. I was hungry. He knelt down, ignoring the filth and the lingering, sickening smell. He ran his fingers over a blackened floor joist. The wood was alligator charred with deep, rolling blisters, a sign of a fire that burned incredibly hot and fast, far hotter than a simple wood fire should. As he dug deeper into a pile of ash near what used to be the main doorway, a new scent hit his nostrils, cutting through the smell of smoke. It was faint, masked by the tons of water the fire department had used to douse the flames, but it was unmistakably there. An oily, chemical smell. The ghost of an accelerant. It smelled like kerosene or lighter fluid. His blood ran cold. It was a smell he knew from his farm equipment, from starting bonfires, but it was a smell that had absolutely no business being inside the castle. There was nothing in there that used fuel. The lights were electric. The toys were wood and plastic. This smell was foreign. It was an intruder. It was evidence. Suddenly, Caryn was there again, her hand on his shoulder. "Matt, what are you doing? You're covered in soot. Come on, let's go inside. I'll make you some coffee." Her voice was soft, but her grip was firm. She was trying to pull him away, to break his concentration. "I'm just looking," he said, his voice flat, his eyes never leaving the piece of charred wood in his hand. "Something's not right." Caryn let out a frustrated sigh. "Of course it's not right, honey. It all burned down. You're torturing yourself." The fire marshal said it was probably the wiring. It's over. We have to accept it and move on. Move on. That phrase again. The same phrase she'd used just hours after the fire. The same desire to pave over the past and build her new future. Every word she spoke now seemed less like comfort and more like a desperate attempt to sell him a story that was unraveling before his very eyes. He stood up, shaking his head. "No," he said, a new hardness in his voice. "It's not over." He knew in his gut that the wiring was a lie. The burn patterns, the smell, this was no accident. This was a deliberate act. This was arson. The question was, who would do something so hateful, so personal? The thought was too monstrous to fully form in his mind. He needed more. He needed proof. And then, like a lightning bolt in his mind, he remembered the security camera on the side of the big barn, the one he had installed a few years ago after a string of minor vandalisms in the area. It wasn't a state-of-the-art system, just a simple set of cameras that recorded to a hard drive in his office. But one of those cameras had a perfect, unobstructed, high-definition view of the kids' castle. It would have seen everything. It would have captured the exact moment the fire started. It would show a spark from a wire, or it would show a figure in the darkness. Either way, it held the truth. A wave of relief washed over him. He could end this nightmare right now. The camera would prove it was a tragic accident, and he could finally let go of this dark suspicion that was taking root in his soul. Or it would prove his worst fears, and he could hand the evidence over to the police. He turned and walked purposefully toward the house, leaving Caryn standing alone by the ashes, her face a mask of confusion and perhaps fear. He strode into his office and went straight to the security DVR tucked away on a shelf. Caryn followed him in, standing in the doorway. "What are you looking for, Matt? What's so important?" she asked, her voice a little too high, a little too sharp. "The security footage," he said, not looking at her, his fingers flying across the keyboard, navigating the system's interface. "The barn camera, it would have seen the whole thing." He could feel her tense up behind him. There was a beat of silence before she spoke. "Oh, that old thing," she said with a forced laugh. "I'll be shocked if it was even working. You know how glitchy that system is." Her attempt to preemptively discredit the evidence was clumsy and transparent. It only fueled his resolve. He pulled up the camera feeds. Camera 1, the parking lot was fine. Camera 2, the pumpkin patch, clear as day. Camera 3, the barn camera pointed at the castle. He navigated the timeline, scrolling back to the early hours of the morning to approximately 2 a.m. He found the time block leading up to the fire. He held his breath and clicked play. Nothing. The screen was a pixelated mess of green and gray static. A file-corrupted error message flashed in the corner. He clicked again. The same result. He scrolled back an hour earlier. The footage was perfect. He scrolled forward to an hour after the fire. Again, perfect footage of the fire trucks and the aftermath. But the crucial window of time, the 30 minutes leading up to and including the start of the fire, was gone. Wiped out. A digital black hole. An impossible coincidence. A fire, a suspected arson, and the only piece of video evidence is mysteriously and precisely corrupted at the exact moment of the crime. The odds were beyond astronomical. This wasn't a glitch. This was deliberate. This was a cover-up. He slumped back in his chair, the breath knocked out of him. The relief he had hoped for was replaced by a suffocating certainty that he was being played, that a terrible secret was being kept from him. "See?" Caryn said from the doorway, her voice oozing with false sympathy. "I told you it was a piece of junk. Just our luck. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. I know you wanted answers." Her performance was flawless, but Matt wasn't watching the show anymore. He was seeing the puppeteer behind the curtain. For a moment, he felt a wave of despair. The physical evidence was circumstantial, and now the video evidence was gone. It was his word, his gut feeling, against her plausible story. But then, another part of his brain, the part that had built a business from the ground up, the part that understood systems and processes kicked in. The video file might be gone, but the system itself keeps a record. Every action, every click, every command is logged. It's a digital footprint, a trail of breadcrumbs that can't be so easily erased. While Caryn might know how to delete a file, he doubted she knew how to scrub the system's underlying activity logs. He minimized the viewing window and began navigating to the system's administrative backend, a part of the software he knew she wouldn't even know existed. "What are you doing now, Matt?" Caryn asked, her voice losing its sympathetic edge, a note of genuine panic creeping in. "Just checking the system integrity," he mumbled, his eyes glued to the screen, "making sure the hard drive isn't failing." It was a lie, a disarming bit of technical jargon meant to keep her at bay while he hunted for the truth. He found the access logs. It was a wall of text, a cascading list of timestamps and commands that would be meaningless to a casual user. But to Matt, it was a story waiting to be read. He filtered the log by date and time, zeroing in on the minutes before the 911 call was placed. He scrolled down, his heart pounding in his chest, and then he saw it. A single line of code that made the world stop. Timestamp 02:17:42 a.m. User admin command delete target file cam throughout barn 2/24/10/26 08 MP4. The command was clear. The file hadn't been corrupted. It had been manually, intentionally deleted. The timestamp was chilling. It was approximately 4 minutes before Caryn claimed she had called 911 in a panic. 4 minutes. Enough time to run from the fire, log into the computer, delete the evidence, and then pick up the phone to play the part of the horrified witness. But the log held one final damning piece of information. The smoking gun. Beside the command was the source IP address from which the command had been issued. An IP address is a unique identifier for a device on a network. He knew the IP address of his office computer. This wasn't it. He quickly opened another window and accessed his home's Wi-Fi router settings. He looked at the list of currently connected devices. There was his phone, his office computer, and there it was, a laptop with the device name Caryn's MacBook Pro. Beside the name was its currently assigned IP address. He looked back and forth between the two screens, the router log and the security system log. The numbers were a perfect match. The command to delete the evidence of the fire had not come from some external hacker. It had not come from a random glitch. It had come from Caryn's laptop, from inside the main house, from the very same Wi-Fi network they were both using at that moment. The air left Matt's lungs. The screen in front of him blurred. This wasn't a suspicion anymore. This wasn't a gut feeling. This was cold, hard, irrefutable proof. A digital receipt for the most profound betrayal of his life. He could see the entire sequence of events now with horrifying clarity. Caryn, driven by her insecurity and her desperate need to erase Amy's legacy, had slipped out of the house in the dead of night. She had gone to the castle, a place she saw as a monument to her rival, and she had doused it with an accelerant. She had set it ablaze, standing back to watch the symbol of his family's history burn against the night sky. Then she calmly walked back to the house, opened her laptop, and with a few clicks, erased the only witness to her crime. Only then, once her tracks were covered, did she wake him up with screams. Only then did she call 911. Her performance of shock and grief wasn't just a lie. It was a calculated, rehearsed part of the plan. Her comforting words, her pushing of the faulty wiring narrative, her immediate pivot to building something new, it was all part of an elaborate and cruel deception. He felt a rage so pure and so cold it was almost paralyzing. This was a woman he had trusted, a woman he had loved, a woman he had defended against his own children. He had planned to spend the rest of his life with her, and she had in one night methodically and maliciously destroyed the most sacred part of his past. She hadn't just burned down a play structure. She had taken a torch to his children's childhood. She had spit on the grave of his marriage to Amy. She had done it all so she could build a wedding pavilion on its ashes. The sheer, naked selfishness of the act was staggering. It was an act of personal, emotional violence, dressed up as a tragic accident. He slowly turned his chair around to face the doorway, where she still stood, watching him, a nervous smile playing on her lips. "Find anything interesting?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Matt said nothing. He simply pointed to the screen. He pointed to the log file, to the timestamp, to the IP address that was a digital fingerprint, her fingerprint, all over the crime. He locked eyes with her, and for the first time, he saw past the supportive fiancé, past the charming partner, and saw the insecure, ruthless stranger who had been living in his home. "Explain this, Caryn," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, devoid of all warmth, all love, all illusion. "Explain how, 4 minutes before you called 911, someone using your laptop deleted the only evidence of what really happened tonight. You didn't just get rid of an old building. You burned it. You burned down my children's history. You burned it all down because you couldn't stand it, because you were so desperate to erase Amy's memory that you were willing to set my entire world on fire. Tell me, was it worth it? Is your wedding pavilion worth all this?" The confrontation had begun. The reckoning was here, and in the silence that hung between them, Matt Roloff knew that his life on the farm and his future had just been burned to the ground, and the arsonist was standing right in front of him. The air in Matt's office was thick with a silence more deafening than any explosion. It was the silence of a truth so catastrophic it had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Caryn's face, a moment ago arranged in a mask of nervous concern, crumbled. It happened in stages. First, a flash of pure, unadulterated panic in her eyes as she glanced at the damning evidence on the screen. Second, a flicker of cold fury, the anger of a cornered animal. And finally, the quick, desperate calculation of a seasoned manipulator searching for an escape route, a new lie, a new performance that could somehow salvage the unsalvageable. She opened her mouth, and the first defense was exactly what Matt expected: denial. A total, complete rejection of reality. "That's insane," she stammered, forcing a brittle laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Matt, that's impossible. An IP address? What does that even mean? You know how technology is. The router must be wrong. The system must have glitched. My laptop? I was in the living room the whole time. You think I'm some kind of computer hacker who knows how to delete security files?" She was grasping at straws, trying to bury the digital proof under a mountain of feigned ignorance. But Matt didn't flinch. He had seen this side of her before, in smaller doses, the way she could twist a story, reframe a narrative, subtly shift blame. Now he was seeing the master at work, and for the first time, he wasn't buying it. "Don't play dumb with me, Caryn," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "I'm not one of your corporate clients you can charm with a smile and a spreadsheet. I'm the man who built this farm. I'm the man who built that security system. And I'm the man who knows, without a single shred of doubt, that you are lying to my face right now." He stood up, and the difference in their height, usually a simple fact of their lives, suddenly felt like a physical representation of the power dynamic that had just been irrevocably altered. He was no longer the doting, slightly oblivious partner. He was the judge, and she was in the dock. Seeing that denial had failed, she shifted her strategy to gaslighting, turning the accusation back on him, attempting to weaponize his grief. Her eyes welled up with crocodile tears. "How can you do this?" she sobbed, her voice breaking with practiced despair. How can you accuse me of something so monstrous? The castle burns down, our future plans are in ashes, and instead of us grieving together, you're in here looking for a way to blame me. Is this about Amy? Is that what this is? You're so haunted by her, so terrified of letting her go, that you'd rather believe I'm some kind of monster than accept that it was just a tragic accident. After everything I've done for you, for this farm, this is what I get. An interrogation. It was a brilliant performance, a masterclass in emotional manipulation. A year ago, it would have worked. He would have felt guilty, apologized for his suspicion, and pulled her into a comforting embrace. But not anymore. The man she was talking to had died in the ashes of the castle. "Stop it," Matt said, his voice cutting through her performance like a surgeon's scalpel. "Just stop. This isn't about Amy. This isn't about a glitch. This is about you. I found the burn patterns, Caryn. I smelled the accelerant. You didn't just happen to be awake. You planned this. You walked out there. You burned down 30 years of my life. And you came back in here and tried to cover your tracks. You stood there and held me while I cried, knowing you were the one who lit the match. The only question I have left is why." Cornered, with denial and gaslighting having failed, she finally broke. But it wasn't a confession of guilt. It was an explosion of justification. The tears were real now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity. "Because I had to," she shrieked, the carefully constructed facade of the calm, capable partner shattering into a million pieces. "I did it for us. Don't you see? I live on this farm every single day and am a ghost here. Every story, every building, every tree is Matt and Amy did this. Matt and Amy built that. That castle, it wasn't a playhouse, Matt. It was a shrine to her. It stared at me from the kitchen window every single morning, reminding me that I'm the second wife, the replacement, the woman who came after. I could never compete with a memory. I wanted us to have something of our own, a future that wasn't built on the rubble of your past. I wanted to build our legacy, not just be a footnote in yours. It was just an old, rotten building. It was holding you back. It was holding us back. And there it was, the truth. Not an apology, but a justification. Not remorse, but a declaration of selfish intent. She didn't see the destruction of a family's heart. She saw a necessary demolition for her own project. She hadn't done it to hurt him. She had done it for him, for them, a twisted, toxic act of love that was, in reality, the ultimate act of narcissistic control. Matt stared at her, and the last embers of his affection for her turned to ice. He saw her now for what she was, a woman so consumed by her own insecurity that she was willing to commit an act of profound emotional violence and call it a gift. He walked past her, out of the office, and to the front door, opening it wide to the cold night air. He didn't turn to look at her. "Get your things," he said, his voice hollow. "I want you out of this house, tonight." Caryn was stunned into silence. "What? Matt, no, we can talk about this. We can fix this," she pleaded, rushing after him. "No," he said, his back still to her. "There is nothing to fix. You can't unburn memories. You can't unlie to me. You can't undo this. You saw a symbol of my family's love, and you took a can of gasoline to it. That's not something we fix. That's the end." He walked out onto the porch, leaving the door open, a clear, final command. He listened as she stormed upstairs, the sounds of drawers being slammed, of angry, muffled sobs. An hour later, she came down, dragging a suitcase behind her. She stopped at the door, her face a mess of tears and rage. "You're making a huge mistake, Matt," she spat. "You're choosing a pile of ash over the future. You're choosing her over me." He finally turned to look at her. "I'm choosing my children," he said softly. "I'm choosing my history. I'm choosing the truth, something you wouldn't understand." She stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked out into the darkness. The sound of her car starting and speeding down the long driveway, the final, definitive sound of their relationship ending. Matt stood alone on the porch for what felt like hours, the cold seeping into his bones. The house behind him, the new dream home they had designed together, felt cavernous and hostile. It was tainted. Her vision, her touch was everywhere. He felt a profound sense of desolation, a loneliness deeper than any he had ever known. He had lost his past and his future in a single night. But through the grief, a new feeling began to emerge: resolve. He had made the right decision. Now he had to make the hardest phone call of his life. He pulled out his cell phone, his fingers trembling slightly as he scrolled through his contacts. He found Zach's name and pressed the call button. "Dad, what's going on? It's late," Zach's sleepy voice answered. Matt took a deep breath. "Zach, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Something has happened." He recounted the entire story: the fire, the initial belief that it was an accident, his suspicions, the burn patterns, the smell, and then the digital evidence, the deleted file, the IP address, the confrontation. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Wait, Dad, are you telling me that Caryn, she did this? She burned down the castle? On purpose?" Zach's voice was a mixture of disbelief and a terrible, dawning horror. "Yes, son," Matt said, his own voice cracking for the first time. "She did. She confessed. She did it to erase the memory of your mom, to erase your childhoods. She's gone, Zach. I threw her out." The news hit the Roloff children like a shockwave. Zach and Tori were the first to arrive at the farm, pulling up in the early morning light. There were no grand pronouncements, just a shared, grim understanding. Zach walked over to his father and simply put a hand on his shoulder. They stood there, together, father and son, looking at the blackened patch of earth where the symbol of their family's happiest years had once stood. The news spread quickly to Jeremy, who was reportedly incensed, feeling a deep personal violation. This was the fortress of his childhood, the place where he and his brother had forged their bond. For him, this was not just an attack on a building. It was an attack on his identity. Molly was heartbroken, Jacob was disgusted, but according to sources, not entirely surprised by the depths of the dysfunction. But the most profound reaction, of course, came from Amy. She heard the news from Zach. She didn't cry, not at first. Instead, a profound and weary sadness settled over her. For years, she had felt like Caryn was trying to methodically scrub her existence from the farm. It had been death by 1,000 cuts, changing her kitchen, redecorating her rooms, taking over her role in pumpkin season. She had been called bitter and jealous for voicing her discomfort, but she had always known, on an instinctual level, that Caryn's mission was one of replacement. Now, here was the final violent proof. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a fact, confirmed in fire and ash. The news was a bizarre and painful vindication. She had been right all along. That evening, Amy stood on the porch of her own home, looking across the fields toward the farm. She could no longer see the familiar turret of the castle on the horizon. A piece of her was gone forever, stolen in the night by the insecurities of another woman. She felt a deep sorrow for her children, whose tangible link to their youth had been so cruelly severed. And in a strange, complicated way, she felt a pang of sadness for Matt. He had been so blind, so eager for a new beginning that he had invited the arsonist into his own home, never realizing she planned to burn the whole thing down to build her own kingdom on top. A few days later, a quiet gathering took place on the farm. Matt, Zach, Jeremy, and their families. They walked to the site of the fire, not as a TV crew, but as a family. They stood in a circle around the ashes, a silent testament to their shared history. The act of destruction, intended to tear the family's past apart, had an unintended consequence. It had brought the core of the Roloff family back together, united in their grief and in their quiet determination to protect what was left. Matt looked at his sons, his grandchildren, all standing on the ground where he and their mother had built a dream. He knew Caryn was wrong. You can't erase a legacy by burning down a building. A legacy isn't made of wood and nails. It's made of the people who are left standing after the fire, the people who remember, the people who vow to rebuild. The question now hanging in the Oregon air was a heavy one. What comes next? Will Matt press charges, turning a family drama into a criminal case? Or will the punishment be Caryn's permanent exile from the world she tried so hard to conquer? And what will rise from these ashes? A new monument to the past? Or will the ground remain scorched, a permanent scar reminding them of the ultimate betrayal? The legacy of Roloff Farms is more uncertain than ever, and we will be here to bring you every single development in this shocking, ongoing story. Make sure you are subscribed because you will not want to miss what happens next.